Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, I know it's been a minute since we've had a flip, but this one is not going to be long, all right? So we spent the last couple days in class working on your profiles of an absolutist, right? Before we ever even get to these guys, we want to make sure we can kind of point to people on the walls and be like, that guy that we're talking about, this guy that we're talking about, and this woman that we're talking about. We talk about Elizabeth and Catherine de' Medici and several other famous female figures that we will be discussing. We want to be able to kind of create that visual stimulus so we can give a lot of depth to this unit, right? So we already talked about the big whys as to why the era of absolutism occurred. And like, look, you know what? Go to the top of your notes, right? Go to the very, very top of your notes, right around where it says absolutism, right? The very top where you had a label. And let's just give it a date of absolutism. Let's just kind of give a number range. It is considered, the age of absolutism is a period around the 17th century. So we're going to say like circa, C-A dot, 1600, and we're going to say it's going to go up to about 1780, all right? 1780, very, very important year, all right? So 1789 is an even more important year, and you'll see why we mean that in a little while. But we're going to say from 1600 to about 1780, okay? So like give or take, okay? So we know this giant era was subject to the Reformation weakening the power of the popes, right? We know it was subject to exploration, giving the monarchs more power with wealth and assets acquired from new colonies overseas, right? And then we know as well as, what's another good one?
Yeah.
Sorry. We also know that, nobles are losing power because of all these religious wars that are breaking out. We talked about the 30 Years' War and how that one was a super big, important one. It's just like, all right? So we got all this crazy stuff going down, right? Now, biggest thing going forward, though, and we also know that even the Renaissance kind of lended itself to the era of absolutism because guys like Machiavelli are going to romanticize the ideas of absolutists, right? Being like, it's better to be feared rather than loved, but he ought not be hated. You're better off having a just ruling king. Even Plato, even the ancients said the philosopher king was the way to go. One true noble leader, right? Well, if you give it to whole families, it doesn't always work out that way. You might end up with a couple ones here and there. We got some greats, right? We got Peter the Great, one group has. We've got a couple other ones that are considered pretty awesome people. But they usually aren't the best, right? Because all of these things, all of these crazy things that happen, religious wars, exploration, reformation, and the death of feudalism are all going to start leading to kings having massive amounts of power and massive amounts of wealth. And they're going to begin to fill those power vacuums that were left by the absence of other leaders when they were rising to power, right? So now, before we go any further, though, we do need to discuss what makes an absolutist, right? So here's what I want you to do. Don't write this yet. Give me one big A, right? So this is the next big title. One big title was why, question mark, and it was really, really big, right? And then we had all these reasons why. And now we got traits of an absolutist, like what makes an absolutist, right? Like, for example, what makes Mr. Terry when it comes to being in class? It's being obnoxious and overexcited. Having a football and flipping, right? Those are my three things that make me me when it comes to me being a teacher. But now we're going to talk about, like, what are the things that make an absolutist before we actually talk about these absolutists, right? So we'll start on our first guy tomorrow, which one of you already has, Charles V of Spain / everywhere. All right, anyway, now. So the traits of an absolutist, there's an easy way to remember this. Give me a big A in your notes. Give me one big A, and it's going to say absolutism, right? Or absolutism, or absolute government, or absolute king, whatever. And rearrange these guys a little bit, right? Rearrange them a little bit. And then go B, small b, C, and D. That way we've got A, B, C, D, all in order, and the B, C, D are the traits of what makes an absolutist an absolutist. So it should look kind of like this, right? So you'll have your big A for absolutism, all right? So lutism, right? Otism. And then you'll go B, and then we'll give that explanation, C, and D. That's how you write a D, right? So anyway, see what I'm talking about? It'll make it a little bit easier to remember going into test time and stuff like that. But let's go ahead and start with the B, shall we? All right, so the B is very important. The B stands for a bureaucracy or a bureaucratic setup to your government, right? So the bureaucracy standpoint, that is a multi-leveled government, all right? So what it is there are people that work beneath the absolutism. You need to be able to explain what a bureaucracy is, okay? But it's the people that work underneath the absolutist. tax collectors, local lords, noble families, other, et cetera, right? It's people that make everything efficient. Because for the longest time, absolutists couldn't rule effectively because they didn't have a postal service. The Russians did. They learned it from the Mongolians. But they didn't have like certain infrastructure means. They didn't have professional armies to carry messages or wage war, right? So bureaucracy is very important. It's a multi-level government, right? So then C, centralized government. A centralized government means that a government is ruled from one location, right? So one location, a capital city centered around one ruling body, right? So for example, the centralized government of Louisiana exists in Baton Rouge, right? The centralized government of the entire nation exists in Washington, D.C. We have a centralized government in this United States, right? So the centralized government in France existed out of Paris, more specifically out of the Palace of Versailles, right, during their absolutist era. In Russia, it was out of Moscow before it was moved to St. Petersburg, right? In Spain, it was ruled out of Barcelona, right? So, like, all kinds of different, like, things like that. Got it? So, biggest thing going forward, though, past the centralized government, remember, we even talked about this the earliest part of the year when we were like, Mesopotamia is a series of city-states, but Egypt is a centralized government, right? The biggest and most important one is the D. Divine right to rule. These absolutists legitimately believed that their power existed as such, right? So they believed that they were appointed by God himself to rule over those countries, right? Because they had religion at their back, whether it be Protestantism or Catholicism, and they believed that God had chosen them and their families and had given them the divine right and power to rule over all things, all people, and all, like, animals even, that existed within their borders and their colonies and their enemies and their everything, right? Makes them very arrogant. Now, anyway, so the first guy the big absolutist countries that we're going to be getting into are Spain, France, Russia, and England, sort of. All right, so the big ones, though, that we focus on are Spain, quote unquote, when we talk about the Holy Roman Empire. So jot the Holy Roman Empire down there and there as well. The HRE, Spain, France, Russia, and England, kinda. England's going to be the one that resists it, right? They resist absolutism and prevent it from actually popping up, which is a really, really important thing that we'll need to discuss later on. All right, so, and then tomorrow, we're going to be getting into how this giant map of Europe was affected originally by this guy, Charles V. All right, so we will start talking about him a little bit later tomorrow. All right, I will see you guys then. Y'all have a good one. Make sure that your information for your project is ready to go so you can make sure that it's turned in by 8 a.m. Friday morning. All right, because I want to hang up my nice ones. I hope y'all have a great evening. I'll see y'all later.